There are hours in the day that feel most unnatural to the human soul. The stillness before dawn, between the hours of 3 and 5, is cloaked in a kind of sacred silence that seems both eerie and divine. It is the time when the world holds its breath. The birds have not begun their song, the streets remain deserted, and even the stars seem to blink more slowly in the heavens. It is not a time most seek willingly, for it requires something of us, a denial of comfort, a departure from slumber, and a reaching for something beyond ourselves. But what if I told you that this very time, this strange corridor of darkness before the light, has been chosen by God as a meeting place, not by accident, but by divine design? There is something about these hours that strips us bare, that removes the noise of the world, the distractions of the day, the burdens of obligation, and in that silence something eternal whispers, "This is not about superstition or some arcane ritual. No, this is about obedience, about trust, about answering when God calls, especially when He calls at an hour we would never choose for ourselves. You see, God does not always call when it is convenient. He often calls when it is quiet. And it is in that quiet that He does His most profound work. When the world is asleep, heaven is awake. When our bodies long for rest, our spirits are most open. It is as though God chooses this time because it demands a sacrifice, however small, and in that sacrifice He reveals something sacred. You may wonder why such an hour would matter. Such an hour would matter. But everything in the spiritual life is a matter of heart and will. When you rise in the dark, when you stumble out of bed not because you must, but because you are asked, something within you begins to shift. You move from a life of reaction to a life of intention. You stop waiting for miracles and start walking toward them. That is the essence of obedience, to move not when we feel ready, but when God says go. And sometimes He says go at 3 in the morning. If you have heard the whisper to rise in the still hours, know this: you are not being disturbed, you are being invited to draw near, invited to listen, invited to be transformed. For God does not call us to the dawn to burden us, but to bless us. He wakes us not to weary us, but to awaken us. And if you will trust Him in this, even this, you will find that those hours become holy ground. The kind of ground where chains are broken, hearts are healed, and destinies are rewritten, not by the strength of your will, but by the power of His presence. There is a time of day that seems forgotten by most, a portion of the night surrendered to sleep, where the stars hold vigil and the world lies hushed beneath a veil of stillness. Between the hours of 3 and 5 in the morning, a silence rests upon the earth that feels otherworldly. It is not simply the absence of noise. It is a divine quietness, a hollow space that seems carved out by eternity itself. And it is within this sacred hour that God often chooses to whisper. You may think such a time belongs to the monks and mystics, to those far removed from the ordinary rhythms of life, but it is not so. This time belongs to the hungry soul, to the weary spirit searching for clarity, to the child of God who dares to believe that heaven is not far off, but near, so near that one must only rise and listen. You see, there are moments in life when God does not shout over the noise of day, but waits for the world to fall asleep, so that His voice might be heard like a stream trickling through the wilderness. We often assume that God speaks only through grand events, flashing signs, or deep revelations. Yet in truth, He most often speaks in quiet promptings, gentle nudges, and still moments that are easy to overlook. He calls not always when we are ready, but when we are empty, empty enough to be filled, quiet enough to be taught, quiet enough to be taught. And what better time for such filling than the early morning, when the soul has not yet been clouded by the demands of the day? To rise during these hours is not a demand of law, but an invitation of love. It is not about obligation, but about opportunity. The Father calls His children to draw near, not because he needs us, but because he longs for us. The veil between heaven and earth feels thinner before the dawn, and those who rise in this sacred time often discover that the voice of God is not distant, but astonishingly close. We do not understand the treasures hidden in obedience until we obey. And perhaps this is the very reason why God chooses the hour least desired, because in our weakness, his strength is made perfect. When the body wants rest, and yet the spirit chooses reverence, something shifts in the heavens. So, the simple act of rising becomes a sacrifice, and in that sacrifice we encounter the miraculous. There is a kind of spiritual clarity reserved for those who seek God in the stillness. The mind is clearer, the heart is softer, the distractions are fewer. In this holy hour, there is no noise from the world to drown out the eternal. There is no one to impress, no task to complete, no image to maintain. It is just you and God. And in that moment, stripped of all else, the soul finds its truest home. The world may mock such devotion or label it impractical, but those who have tasted the sweetness of these divine appointments know better. They know that one whisper from heaven at 4 a.m. can carry more power than 1,000 sermons. They know that when God speaks in the dark, it brings light not only to the moment, but to the entire path ahead. And so, if you find yourself stirred before the dawn, do not roll over and return to sleep. Do not reason it away as coincidence or discomfort. Consider instead that the King of all creation has drawn near and is gently calling your name, not to burden you, but to bless you, not to steal your rest, but to restore your soul. To be called at such a time is a sign of favor. It is the mark of a soul God trusts enough to speak to in secret. And while the world may never see or understand these sacred hours, heaven watches, heaven records, heaven responds. And in that secret place, in that holy hour, when no one sees but God, destinies are formed, healing begins, and battles are won. So the next time the clock strikes that quiet hour, and your heart is stirred, do not dismiss it. Rise, kneel, listen, for the one who formed the stars has chosen that hour to meet with you. And once you have tasted the sacred hush of 3 to 5 in the morning, you will never be the same. It is a strange thing, is it not, to be asked to rise while the world... And there is a profound difference. Anyone can wake when it is time to work, but few will rise when it is time to obey. You see, obedience is rarely about comfort. It is about trust. The kind of trust that says, though I do not understand, I will still go. The kind of trust that does not demand a full explanation, but moves at the sound of God's voice. Rising in the dark is not a ritual to impress heaven. It is a response born out of love and surrender. When the Almighty stirs your soul in those unseen hours, He is not playing games with your sleep. He is unlocking something in you that only darkness can awaken. Most of us prefer light. We like clarity, direction, signs and proof. But faith, that ancient road of saints and pilgrims, is forged in shadows before it shines in the day. And when God calls you at 3 a.m., He is often asking you to do more than pray. He is calling you to war, not the kind with swords and shields, but the kind that requires courage and stillness, obedience and fire. In those hours, your prayers are not merely words, they become weapons. Your silence becomes a stance of surrender. Your breath, offered in quiet reverence, becomes incense that rises before the throne of God. And the angels take notice. Ein. Because it is not in the grand gestures that heaven is moved, but in the quiet obedience of a soul who says, yes, Lord, even now. This rising is not without cost. Your flesh will resist. Your mind will argue. The warmth of sleep will feel like a haven, and every logical voice will say, you need your rest. But there is a voice greater than logic, the voice of your Father, and when He calls, He is not looking for perfection, but for willingness. Those who rise in the dark become vessels for light. However, those who say yes in the quiet hours become the ones who carry power in the loud ones. There are breakthroughs that will never come in the daylight until obedience is given in the night. There are chains that will not break under the sun until they are shattered in the shadow. And God knows this. That is why He beckons you, not when it is easy, but when it is costly, because it is in the costly things that eternal treasures are found. Do not think, dear soul, that you rise alone. When you obey in the dark, heaven rises with you. The very halls of eternity echo with joy when one heart chooses the voice of God over the comfort of self, and what begins in secret will be rewarded in the open. What is birthed in obscurity will one day shake nations. But first, it must be formed in the dark. So rise not because it makes sense, but because He said so. Rise not because you feel strong, but because He is strong in your weakness. Rise because your obedience is doing far more than you can see. It is moving mountains in the spirit. It is shifting things you did not know needed shifting. It is preparing you for a life of greater authority and deeper intimacy. Rising in the dark is not for the faint-hearted, but for the called. And if He is calling you, then He will also strengthen you. You are not just losing sleep, you are gaining vision. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. And when the sun finally rises and others begin their day, you will already be walking in the power of what was done in secret. For those who obey in the night walk in a glory that does not fade in the day. They carry a fire that does not flicker, a peace that does not shake, and a joy that cannot be explained, because they have been with God, not in the convenience of noon, but in the sacrifice of dawn. Amaze, but in the sacrifice of dawn. There is a reason why God calls us to things that do not seem natural. It is not because He delights in discomfort, but because He knows that transformation is found on the road least traveled. Divine appointments are never scheduled according to human convenience. They arrive when the soul is raw, when the body is weary, when logic whispers this doesn't make sense. And yet, it is precisely in those unnatural moments that God does His most supernatural work. Sacrifice is the currency of the kingdom. And it is not the grand visible kind that stirs applause. It is the quiet kind that no one sees, the sort that happens in dimly lit rooms while others sleep, the kind that doesn't make sense to the world, but makes perfect sense to heaven. Waking between 3 and 5 in the morning is one of those acts. It is not a punishment, it is an invitation into sacrifice, and sacrifice, when done in love, becomes worship of the highest kind. You may ask, why such an hour? Why must it cost me sleep, warmth, and comfort? But that is the very essence of sacrifice. It must cost something. If it costs nothing, it carries no weight. God is not after your sleep, He is after your heart. And the heart, stubborn as it is, often needs to be stirred in uncomfortable ways before it becomes pliable. That stirring is what creates space for God to move, speak, and transform. Think of the great stories of old. Not one of them was birthed in convenience. Not one world-changing moment came through ease. Abraham rose early to offer Isaac. Jacob wrestled through the night. Turkey fell through the night. David sought the Lord in the watches of the morning. Christ Himself prayed in agony while His disciples slept. This pattern is not coincidental. It is holy. God has always chosen the hours of night and sacrifice to carry out His most profound works. To meet with God between 3 and 5 is not a chore. It is a divine assignment. And to accept that assignment requires the death of self-comfort, the crucifixion of excuses. It is saying, Lord, even if my body resists, my soul says yes, and that kind of yes moves heaven. That kind of yes causes God to entrust you with more than the average soul, because you have proven faithful in the secret places. Do not be fooled by the stillness of those hours. Though the world is quiet, the heavens are roaring, angels are dispatched, strongholds begin to shake. Heaven leans in. The natural mind cannot comprehend what is happening, but your spirit knows. You are standing in a divine moment, an intersection between the temporal and the eternal. God is not asking for perfection in these moments. He is asking for presence. He wants you, not your eloquence, not your performance, but your yes. Your simple, half-asleep yes is enough to open the floodgates of divine movement. The sacrifice may feel small, a lost hour of rest, a cup of coffee before the sun. But in the economy of heaven, that sacrifice is the seed of fire. Fire that will spread beyond your own life and touch others in ways you cannot yet imagine. You are being trained in these hours, refined in the secret furnace of early obedience. The Lord is building endurance in you, shaping discernment, and forging intimacy. This is not just about now. It is about preparing you for what is to come. And what is coming requires a soul that has already been through the furnace of sacrifice. So do not despise the cost. Embrace it, for every unnatural sacrifice creates a supernatural encounter. And every time you rise, you are drawing a line in the spirit that says, I belong to the King. I live by his rhythm, not the world's. That rhythm may call you into the dark, but it will always lead you into the light. And someday, when you see the fruits of these secret sacrifices, when prayers you whispered in darkness begin to bloom in the daylight, you will know it was worth it. Every early rise, every groggy prayer, every whispered yes in the silence of dawn. It was the price of intimacy. It was the price of intimacy, and you paid it with joy. There is a peculiar strength that comes not from striving, but from stillness, not from shouting, but from surrender, and nowhere is this more evident than in the quiet moments between 3 and 5 in the morning, when heaven draws near and the earth holds its breath. These early hours are not merely about waking, they are about encountering, and every true encounter with God leaves a mark. You may feel weak in those moments, eyes half closed, limbs sluggish, mind clouded, but heaven is not impressed by strength of flesh. It is moved by the openness of spirit. When you show up in your weakness, God shows up in his fullness. And it is in those early morning encounters, those sacred meetings cloaked in silence, that something begins to happen in the depths of the soul, a realignment, a restoration, a release of divine power that does not thunder from the sky, but settles like dew upon the heart. There is hidden power in rising before the sun, not because you must, but because you were summoned. It is the power of consistency, of devotion, of trust, the power of showing up again and again, even when you don't feel anything. For these are not always emotional mountaintops. Sometimes they are dry, sometimes heavy, sometimes plain. But in the kingdom of God, obedience is never wasted. Every moment spent with him is an investment in eternity. And in these hours, you are not simply praying. You are being transformed. You are not merely seeking answers. You are becoming the kind of person who can carry them. God is doing in you what cannot be done in the noise and business of daylight. He is healing wounds you forgot were there. He is strengthening your inner man. He is depositing wisdom, breaking off fear, sharpening your vision. These are not empty moments. They are encounters that carry weight. Think of it, while the rest of the world chases power through performance and noise, you are receiving power through silence and surrender. While others seek to control outcomes, you are learning to yield to divine timing. That is real power. That is the kind of strength that cannot be shaken when storms come, because it is rooted not in circumstance, but in presence. Early morning encounters strip away the mask. They demand nothing of you but your honesty. In the absence of the day's distractions, you come before God just as you are, no performance, no agenda, and that kind of vulnerability creates a space for intimacy. It is there, in the rawness of your spirit, that he speaks in ways he cannot when you are guarded. And here lies the secret. It is not the time of day that holds the power. It is the willingness to meet God when no one else is watching. That choice, made over and over, becomes a wellspring of strength. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, love differently, have different. Not because you are better, but because you have been with the one who is. These encounters are where vision is born, where prayers are formed with fire, where burdens are laid down and courage is picked up, where your identity is clarified and your calling is confirmed. And though they are unseen by the world, they are recorded in heaven. Every tear, every whisper, every "here I am," Lord, spoken in the dark. God remembers it all. You will find that what begins in these moments follows you into the day. Peace becomes your atmosphere. Wisdom becomes your compass. Grace becomes your language. And when others wonder how you endure, how you discern, how you walk with such assurance, you will know you met with God before the sun. You received power the world does not understand. And so, never underestimate what happens between 3 and 5 in the morning. It may feel quiet, even ordinary, but in the spiritual realm, it is anything but. It is warfare. It is intimacy. It is consecration. It is empowerment. It is you stepping into the stream of divine presence and emerging changed. He meets you there, not because he needs the hour, but because you do. Because in meeting him before the world wakes, you learn to live above the noise, beyond the fear, and within the power of his will. So then, what shall we say of all this? That God in his wisdom and mercy has chosen a narrow window of time, the dark cradle of early morning, to call us out from our slumber and into his presence. It is not an accident. It is not a ritual. It is a summons. And to those who hear it and respond, there is offered a life unlike any other. You were not made for mediocrity. You were not born to simply exist and pass your days in the flow of the ordinary. No, your soul was fashioned for the extraordinary, for divine fellowship, for supernatural purpose, for communion with the eternal. But such things are not found in crowded places or noisy hours. They are found in stillness, in surrender, in the holy hush of morning before the world dares to speak. Between 3 and 5 a.m., the veil is thin. And if you would only rise even in weakness, even in confusion, even in trembling, you would discover that God is already there, waiting, watching, calling, and what begins as discipline becomes desire. What starts in sacrifice becomes delight. For those who answer this call do not simply become better, they become new. They are awakened in ways deeper than the physical. Their very identity is reshaped by glory. This is not about earning God's love. You already have it. It is about living in response to it. About saying, Lord, if you are willing to meet me in the dark, then I will rise to meet you. That is the language of surrender. That is the posture of one who is ready to be transformed. You will find over time that the world no longer dictates your pace. You will not live by fear or hurry. You will live by presence, because you began your day with the only one who knows how it should go. You will not be shaken by trial, because your anchor was secured before the sun rose. You will not be overwhelmed by voices, because you already heard the voice that matters most. So, rise, rise, not once, but again and again. Rise in faith, rise in longing, rise when it's hard, and especially when it's hard. Because in that rising, you are not just meeting with God, you are becoming who you were always meant to be. And in the end, when your life is weighed and measured, it will not be the grand achievements that shine the brightest. It will be the hidden moments, the silent sacrifices, the secret hours when heaven met earth and God rewrote your story while the world slept. Answer the call. The King is waiting before the dawn, and he is ready to make all things new, starting with you.